Welcome to the Chatbot Masterclass. Today, we will be discussing a few things. So the purpose of this Chatbot Masterclass is to answer a few questions about designing chatbots, right? And so what I want to do is to actually go through the entire design process and perhaps just give you some framework, a basic framework that you can use to actually design better chatbots. Well, the first question is what actually makes a good chatbot? How do we know a chatbot is good? And also, how can we design good chatbots? Are there any kind of, is there a design process that we can follow? And are there actually best practices for coding and for design? So that's what we will discuss today.
Maybe before that, just an interruptions. If you have any questions, just post it on the YouTube comment itself, like on the top YouTube chat on the right side. So you look at your YouTube platform, and then like you go to the right side of the video. There is something called top chat, right? And that is where you can actually post your question. Okay. So coming back to you, Anok. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. So we are going to take a sample application. It's for a company called Magical Egypt Tours. Okay. And Magical Egypt Tours, they do a few things. There is tours for Cairo, for Luxor, and for the Nile. There's also an FAQ on their website about the pyramids and the Sphinx. And there's also tour booking. So you want to book dates for tours, make payments, and so on, right? And all of these different activities are actually good candidates for building a chatbot around. So the design process it comprises of at least 4 steps, right? The first step is to define your goals, right? That means what should the chatbot do? And also what is the most important thing to do at the start? Because you don't want to design a chatbot which does a lot of things right at the start. You really want to focus on just a few things. So like in our case, there are 3 main categories of things that we can do. And of course, there'll be a lot of overlap between these categories. For example, booking might have to do a bit with tours, and booking might also have to do with FAQ, or maybe FAQ is going to do with tours and booking, right? So there's a lot of overlap sometimes, right? So you have to select really the goal, and especially when you start building or designing your chatbot. You don't want to pick everything all at once because then it becomes too difficult to test. Because you need to build small. So our methodology is that we start to build small, test it, and then slowly grow the application to include more and more features. What you shouldn't do is try and build way too much all at the start, because then you will choke, right, under the complexity. Plus, you'll have a lot of bugs, and the usability of the system is compromised. Okay. So the goal is to pick only a few goals. So in this stage, you want to define your goals, and that means what is the chatbot going to do, and you want to actually pare that down to maybe 1 or at most 2 different goals, right? Not more than that. Okay. The next stage is to sketch and document something called a flow, right? So a flow, I'll talk about a flow, what a flow is later on. So essentially, is what are the conversations that are we going to have? Given these few goals that we're going to take or tackle, what are the conversations that we want to initiate? What are the and also, you need to develop a kind of storyboard. So in your mind, you had to have a very clear picture of the kinds of conversations you want your chatbots to actually have. And you want to put this down in either pencil and paper, or maybe sketch them out, or make some diagrams out first, right? Discuss that with your colleagues or friends or your teammates. And the goal is to actually document this clearly, because it's very easy once you start to code, if the rules become too complex, that you're not quite sure where you're headed, you lose focus and lose direction. And so it's important that you develop the storyboard. All the people who are on the team understand the storyboard, and they understand this, and it's clearly documented what each part of the conversation does, right? And these conversations need to be in service of the main goal. I'm talking here just about the flows of the topics and so on to deal with these main goals, nothing else. Okay. Now, once you have done that, once you have actually sketched these different flows on paper, Then you want to start with a simple wireframe. A wireframe is basically just no frills. Okay, in other words, it can be in black and white, a simple chatbot. It can be without any kind of background or color or anything else, right? And really your focus is on the usability aspects of it. Do the conversations that when you play with the chatbot and you have these conversations with it, does it actually map on? Does it agree with your design, your sorry your design, your storyboard, and does it meet the goals? Do you need maybe to add in more conversations, right? So I see this as a bit of a feedback loop. So when you start playing with it internally, so it's really for internal testing, okay? And another goal is to reduce the IDKs. So usability means, does the chatbot serve its purpose? And reducing IDKs obviously means that you want to reduce those situations in which the bot says, I don't know, right? Okay. And in service of reducing IDKs, you want to use logging liberally, especially when it comes to the IDKs. So if you log the IDKs, you will know when your bot hits an IDK, and that gives you very valuable information of where to fix your rules or your templates. Okay, because you alone doing a test might not uncover a few IDKs, but when you start to give it to, let's say, your friends, your colleagues, or maybe even the school, or let's say even the public, right, then you will see, you'll uncover a lot more IDKs. And lastly, once you're happy with the usability and the IDKs are reduced, you will never be able to reduce the IDKs down to zero, because people can ask all sorts of questions, which are outside even the scope of the bot itself. That always happens. But the idea is to reduce the IDKs, which might still be relevant. That means those questions or responses that are still relevant to your topic. Lastly, you want to then layer on a personality onto the bot itself, okay? And that is really where you put in the graphics, you put in the fun parts, you put in also stuff like, greetings and so on, right? And the idea is that you also want to reuse some of these greetings, you want to reuse some of these topics. So these are topics that you can reuse, maybe for even multiple bots, right? Okay. So let's focus on the first part, and it is that we want to define our goals first. And so among these three things, the tour descriptions, FAQ, and tour booking, let's select the tour descriptions, okay? And the reason for this is that maybe it's something the public can immediately use, and maybe that's what they are interested in. And this is something that comes out of an internal discussion in your team. So in the tour description itself, right, you might have, let's say, Cairo city tour, because our company does the Luxor temple tour and also the Nile cruise, right? So you've got to decide, which of these do you want to tackle as well. So this process of breaking down really helps. You don't want to tackle too many of these very different topics all at once. You want to do few but deep, okay? And then slowly start to expand your chatbot so you can do more things. So the key questions you can ask to make a selection is, what is most interesting for the target market? So if, for example, your target market is scuba divers, maybe the Nile cruise might be interesting, right? Whereas if your target market is maybe people who like archaeology and the history of Egypt, it would be about the Luxor temple, okay? Also, you want to balance that against who are the most important clients. So the topics which are most interesting may not be most important to the most important clients, right? So this you need to bear in mind, especially in a corporate setting, right? So sometimes the unpopular topics are actually useful for the most important clients. So it depends on what the chatbot. This is why defining the purpose of the chatbot at the very start is important, right? And you might want to have different varieties or variants of the chatbot for different purposes. Okay, so you want to balance these two things because they might not be aligned. So let's select, for example, the Nile cruise. So in the Nile cruise goal, or you can say the super topic if you want to, right? There might be many different sub parts to it, right? The fun facts, the history of the Nile, right? the creation of papyrus, right? The role of crocodiles in the Nile, and maybe you talk about the geography, the fauna and flora of the Nile, or perhaps even put in like videos about a life on the Nile, as a fisherman, or maybe something else, right? Or just living by the Nile itself, right? Um, the effects of the Aswan Dam, right? So all of these things can be discussed, and they're potential topics which are interesting. So these are really the micro topics that you want to deal with, okay? And splitting these things up into micro topics is not so easy, right? Because a lot of them have overlap, and you need to play around with the topics before you can actually come up with a suitable split. Put them in different files. Don't put all your micro topics in one big file for Nile. Instead, you might put maybe Nile fun facts. Maybe have a folder called Nile, and then have the topic fun facts and history and so on separately. Keep the files small as possible. Okay, then use the multiple includes to include all of them in your main.m. Okay, now, one technique that you can use is to separate out the micro topics, which is basically text, from the resources that these micro topics use. Because the resources might be reused, right? So for example, let's say you've got a photograph of a crocodile, that's a picture. You don't want to directly embed that into the micro topic crocodile, because if you change the URL, or for example, you find a better picture of a crocodile, then you got to scrounge through the whole list of topics, and you might have, let's say, even hundreds of different topics, micro topics, right? It's very hard to find. So what I would recommend is that you put all your resources, right, into one or two files, right, standard files. So like in this case, it might be nile/pictures.m or nile/videos.m, depending on how many pictures and videos you actually have, right? And make these Smojo words, which you can then call up in a smart context. Okay, so this keeps a management, especially of larger, more realistic topics, reasonable, right? What you don't want to do is to sprinkle your resources all over the shop. Okay, and doing it this way also allows you to share resources, for example, between different, let's say you develop something for the Luxor temple, or for the Cairo city tours, then you might want to share some of these resources. Okay. All right. So let's focus on the micro topics, because that's what's really interests us. How do we organize these things, and how do we, put them into place, right? So let's say I have all these micro topics. At the very start, we know it's about the Nile, about Nile cruises and so on. And ideally, what you want to do is at the very start, actually put them into a single room. All right. So all of them go into one room. And the way you do that is have the room and then put the includes. So you have a Nile.m with a room there and room Nile. And then you want to do the includes under a Nile.m. So some pro tips here. Always start with just one room. Don't create rooms willy-nilly at the start if you can help it. Okay, start with one room first, which is like the big one for Nile. And then you want to make sub-rooms depending on flow, not on topic. I'll explain what that means a bit later, okay? But in other words, don't create sub-rooms just because you have a topic called, let's say, crocodiles or something like that, right? It doesn't make sense. You want to create these sub-rooms based on a flow. You want to put in something called escapes as well. I'll explain again what escapes are later on. Well, right now, actually. So an escape is essentially a method to go from a sub-room back into the main room, or back into even the original room. So it depends where you want to go back into. It's absolutely up to you, right? But typically we go back into the room that we were, the enclosing room, right? So that's what an escape does. So it can be like a MCQ, like click a button here, yes or no, all right, a simple yes or no, or it can be select the room you want to go into, or the thing that you want to do, or it can even be automatic. For example, let's say in the case of an IDK, you might just pop back the person back into the enclosing room. So escapes, there are forced escapes, all right? A forced escape is done in the room's IDK, all right? So in other words, when you hit that room's IDK, you can actually force the escape. right? And you can do that by just putting in a button, or you can put in, let's say, a yes, no, or just kick the guy back, kick the user back into the back room, the enclosing room. Or you can have a planned escape. Now, this, I would suggest you don't use this technique too often, but the idea of a planned escape is that once the user is interacting, let's say in one room for a long time, let's say on the Nile room, maybe at some point, you want to, at random, perhaps, ask him if he wants to learn about the city tours, right? And if he says yes, then you want to take him into that room instead. You want to just escape or drop the Nile room key, and you want to actually go into the city tours, like Cairo room, for example, right? And that really flips the entire conversation there. You can do that using a mem. So in other words, the mem just keeps track of how many times the user has been interacting or inside this room, okay? And you want to then put in the logic into a few selected rules, right? Maybe at the end, maybe after 10 interactions, or maybe at a certain, when he hits a certain rule, or maybe at the IDK or something like that, okay? So I don't use this technique too often because it can be a little clumsy and you got to keep track of the user, what they're doing, etc. But it's one that is available to you if you wanted to use it, right? Another method is, if you don't want to use MEMS, is on the selected rules in which you want to do the escape, you can have an alternative in your A, right, which also puts in a button or something like that saying, do you want to know about city tours, okay? All right, some pro tips. You want to really put all your MEMS in one file. So you don't want to, again, just like the resources, you need to organize your stuff, okay? So the reason why you want to put all the MEMS in one file is to first of all, it prevents you using the same mem for two different things, or the same name for two different things, and that causing problems, right? So I would suggest you put all your MEMS in one file and include that right at the start of your main.m. Okay, you want to document all your mems, exactly what they do. So you want to give them some kind of, helpful names, maybe, all right? Don't call them XYZ, A or B or some rubbish like that, right? That just makes it very confusing, right? So give your mems names that are memorable so that you know what they're doing, okay? The last tip is that I would suggest don't directly manage your mems in your rules, okay? Instead, you want to put in some Smojo words in this mem.m file, which makes the mem change and do stuff, okay? So avoid changing the mems directly in rules. Instead, you let the words, create some Smojo words in the mem file, that mems.m file itself, which does the management for you. I'll illustrate this shortly in a later example. Okay, so in the design process, now we have done the stage one. We have actually defined our goals. We want to do the Nile. We're going to do tour booking, and in the tour booking, we're going to do the Nile cruise. So that's pretty specific. We have satisfied the few goals, right? But even then, now we want to just look at the kinds of flows that we have, okay? And we want to like develop a storyboard around those things, right? So what is a flow? So a flow is really a set of related templates. So in most cases, you will get solitary templates. These templates are to answer questions like how long is the Nile and so on, okay? But even so, sometimes flows could be related, but they're all in one sort of like one topic, okay? Uh, in the extreme case, the flows have got to be sequential. Like in the case of a booking, for example, if the user says, I'd like to make a booking, then you need to ask what is your name, right? Get his email address, etc. What is his destination, and so on, right? And so these would be grouped really. These are a set of related templates, and they are strongly related because they need to be asked in sequence, right? Uh, okay, so the way you do this is, okay, so you first need to understand what the flows are within the conversation itself, right? And the key part is to ask yourself, what questions are important for this topic, right? So the important questions, the key questions, are the ones you want to tackle first. you want to actually put in as many of the solitary single type flows into one file, and maybe the more complicated flows which require related flows, related topics which are in a more complicated flow, you want to put it into a different .m file, okay? Suitably named, obviously, right? So try to keep the flows trivial. It means just one template. Usually that's not possible for any kind of meaningful interaction, but if you can, you can try that. And you can always define a flow using a mem in a room or just a room alone, right? So it really depends on how strongly coupled, or if you need a sequence and so on for these flows for set of related topics. So let's take an example here where I've about the booking example. Okay, so I'm going to illustrate using a mem and a room together. So there's one room called booking. You can see it as a room and end room. And the booking room has got just three templates, right? The first responds to a yes, that he confirms he wants to make a booking. The second says no, he doesn't want to make a booking, right? So things like yes and no, these kinds of very common responses, right? You really want to put into a file all by itself. So the types and things that very commonly used, these commonly tools like responses yes and no, put the responses yes and no into one file, okay? And that allows you to actually switch even languages, because then you can actually code with at yes to mean yes, and then you can use your own language or your own slang in the files itself, in the actual file, to actually do the appropriate matching, okay? Now, so this structure here has got the first part, which is a trigger. So the trigger is a template that shifts or gives the user the key to enter the room. Okay, so in this case, when the user says, let's say I'm making it really simple here, okay, but of course you want to do a better match. If the user says I want a booking, or just has booking anywhere in his sentence, this will trigger this rule, okay, the first rule. And then you want to ask, just to confirm, do you want to make a booking or not? But give him the key anyway, okay? So when he has the key to go into the room or not, then you can actually ask the further questions, yes or no, right? So you really want to just ask the user then, should we actually stay in the room or not? Now, you got to be careful here, because what if he says booking, and then he says something like banjo, okay? So it doesn't match. He's got the booking, what is it called, key, and he's in the book. He can be in the booking room, but it's not yes or no, okay? So you actually want to actually make this a little more fail-safe, so that the appropriate response is correct. I've just made this very simple just to illustrate how it actually works, okay? But essentially, you want to have some kind of mechanism to decide whether you should stay in the room or not. And once you decide to stay, if you decide not to stay in the room, you can call back and you can go back. But once you are in the room itself, then you want to actually start off the process of asking the first question in your set of related templates. All right. So in this case, I've said, what is your name? And if the response, sorry, there shouldn't be a response yes there. That should just be the booking name. Okay. On the first C, okay, so C is a new thing that we're doing, where you can actually run a command. Okay, so the C should just say a booking name. It shouldn't say $ booking name, like this. So this part here ought to be gone, just booking name. My apologies. Oops. Okay. Now, last of all, and this is what this is why you should keep your related flows simple and short and put them into a separate file. And that's because related flows are complicated to write. In this case, because there's no way for us to really determine whether the thing is a person's name or not, we want to just then keep it really carefully done, where we use a booking name. So you can see booking name ? Is really a Smojo word in your mems.m file. And what that does is just to ask the mems.m mem whether are we in the name state, are we going to ask for names or not. Instead, this is the best method. Instead of doing something like, question equals 1, question equals 2, question equals 3, and so on, like, don't do that, okay? You need to do this instead, right? And put in a smojo word somewhere in the mems.m so that you can do the right thing. Okay, so this is the flow for this room. Um, and that's it. All right, so you can see once the email is obtained, the K back is called. So that should, I made a mistake here also. The K back shouldn't be unconditional, it should be conditional on the booking email. So once the booking email is done, then you can call the K back. Okay. Okay, so now we're at the stage where uh, we have defined the flows, we know what we want to do, and it's time really to start coding like how we did for the MEMS plus rooms just now. And the idea is that you really want to aggressively keep it simple first and aggressively use the logging on the IDKs to determine where you have missed maybe some valid or responses. Remember, you cannot capture all IDKs, okay? There are some IDKs, there are two kinds of IDKs, bad IDKs and good IDKs. The good IDK is where, you want to say, I don't know, because it's really out of your topic. For example, if this chatbot is about the Nile or let's say Egypt tours, and the person asks about Norway, you can say, I don't know, that's fine, okay? But he asked about the Nile and maybe, when is the best time to visit Cairo, for example, or when is the best time to actually do the Nile cruise? What time of year? That's an important question. And if you can't understand that question, then that's a dangerous or bad IDK. In other words, you've actually lost out a customer or a client or something, right? So you want to actually log those kinds of questions as they come in. So you need to log all your IDKs, and then you need to test and see, you need to read the logs to find out really on a regular basis, to find out what you have missed and what can be improved. Okay, so just to reiterate, IDKs are indeed a very valuable source of information, and you want to test this early. So start with a simple set of rules, all right, which just barely meet most of your requirements, and test early. In other words, get your colleagues to test, get your friends to test, get the public to test, if or maybe not the public to test immediately, but people that you trust to test, so that you can actually get those IDKs and fix them in your logs. Right? So ideally, early testers are those who understand. You start with those who understand the topic or the business or the process that you're looking at, and then later on, you want to actually move on to those people who are users. Those who are the potential users of your system. Right? Get a few of these beta testers to come in and test out your chatbot. Right? But you really want to fix the IDKs early. If you have too many IDKs, then the chatbot becomes very frustrating to use, and it no longer becomes usable. Okay, and people then don't want to test it. Okay, now there's this concept of a dev and live systems that I want to share also, and this is how you should develop your chatbots. Okay, so what you shouldn't do just have one system. What you should do is have a dev and live system, and the idea is that the live system contains the code which is public facing, and it's the real chatbot, so to speak, that your users actually use. Okay, and there's a development system or dev system for short, and that is the internally used code, right? So for example, in our case, maybe the chatbot for the live system is called Egypt. So the name of the chatbot is called Egypt. And maybe on the dev system, we call Egypt dev or some other thing that you want to call it, all right? So again, the live system is a public, well, they're all public URLs, but this is a public URL that you share with other people, all right? And the level of sharing depends on, obviously, how advanced your chatbot is. You want to do the IDK logging, and you need to look at the IDK logs here, not in the dev system. The dev system is basically for internal testing, and even the logging and so on is all for internal use, all right? But you need to put fixes for your IDKs that you get from the live system into the dev system, okay? And of course, enhancements. In other words, if you have new topics or new ideas or new flows, you want to put those enhancements into the dev system. And the live system should only contain the latest code. Clean, no bugs, simple. Okay. But in the dev system, you want to keep the old versions of your templates in your code. You can call it, for example, let's say I have a nile.m. If I make a change, before I make a change or a substantial change, I can just save a version of it. Okay. How frequently you save, how often you save, that's really up to you. And that's really beyond the scope of this talk. Ideally, that will be something called source control, which I won't discuss here in this masterclass, but maybe some other time. Okay, so now we are at the last square, which is really giving your chatbot some kind of personality, okay? And what that means is that you want to just put in some kind of graphics and fun layers over your chatbot. Uh, and you also want to look at reusing the topic. Now, a few tips. You should always, when in the personality part, you should always trap and respond to profanity, okay? So never allow your bot to be abused with an IDK and so on, with people who are using foul language. So trap most of the common stuff that comes in through your IDK logs. If it's profane, then you want to trap and respond to it, right? Appropriately. And that really keeps people, it gives even those who are rude a better user experience. You also want to add in simple greetings. So most times people want to say hello, how are you, and so on, right? So you want to put in some basic part of that, right? About the weather or something, right? So something simple. It can be. It is really. So these are separate micro topics that you want to develop, and then layer onto your system right at the top before your mems. Okay. Make them stateless. Don't make these things stateful. In other words, they shouldn't have any mems at all. All right, so keep it simple, but keep it stateless. And you can also add in some personality for very specific questions like, who are you? Are you a bot? What is your favorite tour, etc. Right? And besides just giving your bot a little more personality, it can also be an opportunity for you to engage your users in the commercial setting. If it's let's say like in this case for the product discovery, for this chatbot on the Nile cruise, if the user asks, what is your favorite tour and so on, it doesn't really fall into any one of the categories, right? But it's still useful because it can be used to actually upsell the user or advise the user on something that might be interesting, right? It can be a place where you can actually call in some random file or a random picture about, let's say, hey, this is something that we took yesterday, right? So keep it interesting. Take the opportunities to actually add personality in your bot. Don't go overboard, right? But you can do it in a modest amount. Some conversation tips as well. Use humor, but keep it light. So instead of just responding with I don't know all the time, what you can also do is, for example, is maybe to say, I can't understand what you're saying, but hey, this is actually a good picture of the Nile that I took yesterday, right? And put it up, right? Or maybe put in a GIF or something like that, right? And mix it in. And you can actually do a lot of that using a simple Smojo word, which actually selects the video or the animation or stuff that you want to do, right? It's not so hard to do. It's actually, you can do it in 5 minutes. You want to use the semicolon alternatives, but don't go overboard. The purpose, people understand that they are interacting with the chatbot, okay? And the focus really is, so the rule is this, most times, maybe you want to just put in 3 or 4 alternatives, right? More than that is it's just meaningless. So you want to then focus on usability really of your chatbot itself. Usability is so much. So what is usability? Usability is simply, does your chatbot serve its purpose? Does it serve its client, serve the purpose that you design it for? That is a usable chatbot. Okay. Some graphics tips. I've seen a lot of chatbots now from various people, right? Some graphics tips. The first is keep the background quiet, okay? So a lot of people like to put in these big backgrounds and so on. Well, that's okay, but it's much better if it distracts from the interaction, then it is actually reducing the usability of your chatbot itself, right? And plus, keep in mind that most people interact with a chatbot on a mobile phone. We actually designed the chatbot system not for your laptops, but for your phones, okay? Because most people, well, if they're on a laptop, then it's easier just to browse the information on a website, for example, right? But if you're on a phone, it's harder to read. It's less easy to read, and a chatbot actually makes a lot more sense, right? So keep the background part quiet. Maybe something that is, I would recommend something that is tileable, right? So that as the thing scrolls, you don't get the kind of really sharp gaps between the images.
I think just to add on that, there is actually something called seamless background. So seamless background basically like enables you to, let's say, like put any background, right, regardless of how big, how small is the user screen. It still like gives you a very nice full picture without some kind of squarish break and all that. So tileable or seamless background is something that you go, but keep it simple so that it's very obvious for your users, right, to focus on your conversation, not on the background itself.
Yeah. And make the background maybe something that is related. So for example, let's say in the case where for the Egypt tours, maybe I can put in a background of hieroglyphics, for example, right, which is repeatable or tileable, maybe in very muted colors, right? That gives it a kind of Egypt type flavor, right? So that only depends. This is where the soft skills of this whole thing comes in. Okay. Last of all, do use pictures, videos, maps, diagrams liberally. Okay. The more interesting information a chatbot dishes out, the better it will be. Okay. Okay. I've really come to the end of my masterclass for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe now we can look at some Q&A.
Okay, so so far there is no Q&A right now because there's a delay of 10 seconds in YouTube Live, right? So while waiting for the Q&A, maybe I just also want to ask like most commonly asked questions from the users, right? One question is that I have a lot of basically IDK situations, and probably it's also because of the way I handle my conversations, right? The questions I set up to my users. How can I minimize as many IDK as possible from the questions I ask to the users?
Okay. So the IDKs that you get are if you're getting a lot of IDKs, there could be three different reasons. The first reason is because your topic is improperly scoped. That means it's not narrow enough, or it's not finely defined, right? And this is often times when you're dealing with something that is like a toy problem, like the likes kind of thing, where you got coffee and Bach and so on, right? Where it's a toy problem, it's just for training purposes only, right? And the scope is fuzzy. Okay. So, but in a real life situation, the scope is a lot more clearer on what is and is not the topic that can be handled by the bot itself. So I think the first step is really the scope of the bot itself. And that is really something that you got to do. It's just design. Okay. You got to sit down and design. The second one is that IDKs can be also because the rule coverage or the template coverage is poor for your bot. Then again, also, like I said, you can actually trap those IDKs. Initially, to get a lot of IDKs is fine, right? You have to ask yourself, really, why are you getting these IDKs? Is it because maybe your users are getting a lot of spelling errors or giving a lot of spelling errors, okay? Or is it because they are asking topics on which your bot doesn't really cover, okay? Or is it perhaps for some other reason? Maybe you didn't actually, there's some grammar that you didn't cover as well. So different languages have got different grammar rules, obviously. English, the grammar for English can be complicated when it comes to plural forms, or let's say tenses and so on, right? The approach that we want to take is to keep it really simple, right? And so, but you need to handle and pass these forms. So I think that's the second way you can get IDKs. The third way is that instead of you asking the user and the user responding, the user starts to ask you. So that that's an asymmetry there. If you ask the user questions, then you are much more assured of the answers. But if the user asks you a question, then it's a lot harder to tackle, okay? So that asymmetry, so in other words, if your chatbot is constantly responding to a user's query, then it's more likely that you will get an IDK. All right. So I would recommend that you do that only in very restrictive situations, like a FAQ or something else, right? And then if you really don't know, say, look, I don't have that on my FAQ. There's a database, okay? Yeah, so that's the best that honestly I can actually do for you. What I would also recommend is that in the case where it's more free form, you want to do a more liberal type matching, like, you know, maybe with a search function or something else, right? So that allows you to actually be more flexible in the kind of things that you actually give out to the user himself. All right, so those are the 3 points from my experience.
Okay, we have a question from the YouTube. When we design our group chatbots, are there any ways so we can collaborate easier and code simultaneously? I think you covered actually like some part of it, which is the dev and the non-dev version, right? So how can you collaborate better when we design a team chatbot?
Yeah, okay, that's actually a good question. So what I would recommend is that you elect one person as the maintainer, right? So the maintainer has got final say on the chatbot that is actually being deployed, okay? And each person working on his or her parts have their own micro topics. So you can actually work together. So when you say work together is really, it's that you want to work on different parts of the chatbot itself, right? There's some parts which are common, you shouldn't actually have to change, but some parts in which you have to actually change, okay? So there can be two changes, common changes, in other words, changes to the mem or changes to the what is it called, to the pictures and videos and so on. Those have to be communicated directly to the maintainer so that he can maintain and update the database appropriately. But if you are working on your own set of rules, then you want to just work on the rules, do the testing out first, and then once it's ready, once you're done, once you're happy with the situation, then you actually post it back and ask the maintainer to update the main front-facing chatbot. Okay, so the maintainer himself or herself will also have two versions, the public-facing one and the dev system. The dev system, both are actually controlled by the maintainer. Okay, and the group, so the dev system is really where those small changes and so on would go to initially, right? But the maintainer and maintainer is the one who tells everyone also about what happened to the IDKs and so on, maybe every day or every a few days, depending on how heavily your bot is used. You want to then share that information with your teammates. Okay, but that is the method that I would recommend.
Let me check for another questions. Right, there's one more from Emmy. Um, is there a way that we can pass a memory from a room to another room? And also, can we make a range of number as a thing? For example, type double dot number double dot 15 to 40.
Okay, so the answer for the first question is that are memory items actually be passable from room to room? Okay, now the answer to that is that memory has got nothing to do with rooms. Okay, Memory is global. In other words, all the topics share the same memory. And that's why I asked you to actually put it into a separate MEMS file. If you want to do it, split something up room by room, then just give them different names and give them a meaningful name. So if I have a room called booking, I can have booking dash names or booking dash email and so on, right? To actually keep track of those things. But you want to put them all into one file and document clearly, not in a mess, what those things do. The second question was, can you repeat please again?
Let me just check. Let me just read again. Um, and also, can we make a range of number as a thing?
Yes. Yes, you can. It's called programmatic types. Okay, so that is not thought in this sessions, but you can see an example of that happening in a topic called numerical.m. Okay, where you can actually check for real numbers and integers and other stuff. So the answer is yes, yes, you can. You can even do that for things like, but that the reason why I didn't teach it is because it does require knowledge, more deeper knowledge of Smojo programming. Okay, so if you're willing to invest some time to learn a bit of Smojo, then that will be easy for you to learn, to pick up.
Okay. So, yeah, maybe like while waiting for other questions, right? I also want to maybe some advice as well, like from based on what the bots we evaluate, right? When it comes to opening statement, we do see a lot of bot actually start with "ask me anything." That is a surefire to IDK.
Yeah.
So I think keep in mind on what you ask to your users, right? And then
Yeah.
also, right, try your best to write what Arnold say, which is absolutely right. Is prime your users to always answer your questions, not you answering users' question. So meaning that, like, be make your bot interrogative, and then because the main purpose of your bot, right, to be honest, like the main purpose of chatbot is actually education, to educate your customers about anything, whether to help them answer their answer, like, the most commonly asked question, or whether, like, to tell them or educate them about new products, whether you also like to provide some kind of customer support about any kind of product mistake or any kind of failure on what. But the purpose is to educate. When it comes to educations, right, don't let your users ask questions too many, and also be very specific in terms of, like, what you ask to your customers as well. Never ask why. If you once you want to ask why, right, be prepared to use buttons in a way. So don't get, I mean, be very intentional in terms of asking. Try to ask something like that is very definitive, like, for example, like, how old are you, or even like, what's your favorite food, something like that is very definitive, instead of like asking for reason. Asking for reason is actually trickier when it comes to building your bot. So be very careful as well. And also, right, also make use of, be very smart in terms of utilizing your IDK to keep the users engaged. One trick that we've seen as well, right, from the beta bot, is that make your IDK, right, some kind of a suggestion as well. I might not be answer your question right now. I don't understand your question, but here is some fact that you might want, that might be interesting for you. Then there are some buttons as well. For example, let's say you are building some kind of financial bot, right? Let's say, oh, I don't understand your questions, but this is something that you might interest you, right? Like, number one, what is the available saving product? Number two, how can I invest better? Then when they click, right, it goes back to the main content that you already prepared, a very beautiful content that you already prepared. For example, like, if you are already investing in terms of a lot in terms of investment product, then you click investment, then you have this kind of train of thoughts already. Oh, how old are you? What is the investment product that is suitable for you? Something like that. So these are, I think, like the best use case that we've seen the students use to create a very, like, engaging bot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can actually go one step further to actually keep track of where the user has gone, right? What rooms he's entered in as well. And then actually, if you hit an IDK, like what Chris says, you can actually display the buttons depending on the most likely place that he needs to go next, right? So if he, for example, let's say if he wants to go to the, let's say about the Nile, for example, in this cruise, right? Then maybe, you know, Luxor is just close by the Nile, and maybe you want to suggest, would you like to visit Luxor as well? That's an adjacent kind of thing, but you know that because he's already in the Nile, he's done the Nile already. That kind of logic really can be put into the mems.m file, right? And it can help to control the flow of your program. But don't go overboard again, because then it becomes very complicated to manage. Okay.
Okay, just for those of you who want to ask questions but don't know how, right? Just in case, there is, you can just open you can just check your YouTube, YouTube link on the right, and there is actually a chat platform for you to post your question. I think we have one excellent question from Popo. In developing a chatbot, which one is better, to direct the users through multiple choice question or buttons, or to give the user the freedom to ask question?
I think it's a balance. It's a good question. I think it's really a balance. If there are a lot of, if you can quickly and reliably identify where the user should go, then yes, by all means, give him a multiple choice. In fact, I would say, if let's say you had more than 3 or 4 choices, you had more than 3 choices, that's 4 and above, at any one point in time, there's something wrong with your design. Okay, so let me say it again. If you got more than 4 different things that you want to ask the user at any one point in time, 4 and above, there's something wrong with your, probably something wrong with your design, the way you split the chatbot up, the way the topics are being asked, and so on. The chatbot interface is not good for that kind of lots of different buttons. It looks really ugly, and I think it sort of like defeats the purpose of a chatbot, right? I think the best kinds of places for a button is where you've got a few things, like, you know, or where you can infer what the user wants, okay, and then maybe do some backtracking if he doesn't want to do it, right? You use buttons really when you want to save the user some time as well, like, you know, instead of him typing yes and no each time, then just put in a yes, no button, right? Create a Smojo word to do that and to actually do the response, right? So you can put that somewhere in a response, in a separate Smojo file, and then reuse that yes, no type response anywhere else in your work, right? So yeah, so that's my advice. Don't use, if it's more than 3 buttons or 3 choices, something is wrong with your design. Okay, this is not a website, and it's not something that, you know, that you want, you know, it's not a replacement for a website, is my point. Okay, you should actually, the user should be asking questions, because sometimes, let's say I have got 10 choices, okay, and it's the person using the chatbot, rarely that will he want to, like, you know, go to one very specific topic. All right, if he did, he will tell you, he'll say, look, I want to know about Luxor temple. Okay, so among the 5 or 6 topics that this Egypt magical Egypt tour company can have, you know that this user is already wanting that, right? So that can be trapped actually quite early and quite easily. And then you can direct him to the appropriate room straight away, right? So that kind of trapping can be at the high level. So this is like user, there are different kinds of users, right? Users who know what they want, they will tell you what they want. You don't have to put the MCQ. All right, just put Luxor and then you're there, or put Nile and then you're there into the room straight away. Don't fuss with them so much. The tough one, really, and this is really where the chatbot is useful, is discovery, right? So discovery is where the user doesn't know what he wants to do. And this is the case where oftentimes the novice chatbot user will present the user with, you know, like 20 different choices, say, select what you want. Okay, but then what's the point then of building a chatbot? I may as well just go to the website and do it. It's clumsy, right? So the way you should do it is the way human beings do it. When you go to a sales shop and so on, let's say to a shop, and you say, look, I want to buy a bike, okay? The first thing the user will ask is, I mean, the salesperson will ask is, are you new to bikes? Do you have any prior experience with bikes and so on, right? And if you say yes, he will give you some suggestions. If you say no, he'll give you a different set of suggestions. And he will basically ask within 3 or 4 questions, right? So in the 3 or 4 questions, you can use MCQ, you can use free form, you can use buttons. It's really up to you to design it, okay? But the idea is that you're guiding the user towards a set of possibilities, and that is product discovery, okay? And that is really what the chatbots are very good at.
Yeah, I think just to add Arnold's comments as well, like when the use, like I think besides like use MCQ being like make your chatbot looks less intelligent or less smart, I think also like in terms of scalability, right? For example, right, I want to create a chatbot that can discover the books that I like in the library. There are like thousands or 2,000 different types of books.
Yeah.
You can't just display that on the MCQ, right? So basically, like what you should do is that like if you use this is where the memory and associations and also search will be very useful. And then what you do is that like you can't display that using MCQ, but what you can do is that for those people who like certain kind of books and all that, like mystery novel, and you want to combine like multiple like preference together. I like mystery, I like humor as well, and I like romance. Right, this is where your chatbot actually shines a lot. The MCQ like use is actually for convenience. Let's say, for example, if the answers you need are very long, but that I think is also like coming back to your chatbot design is not so good lah. But let's say if let's say like a FAQ, right? Then like the question that the most frequently asked questions are pretty long. Then you can just like make it simple by using buttons. But again, like this is my preference. I don't really like buttons too much unless it's really necessary. Just use it for convenience, for answer long questions, or like what Arnold say, yes, no, yes, no. If you have a lot of yes, no, then buttons are okay. Um, yeah. So moving on to another questions. Okay. Should I learn Smojo Academy first? I don't think it's needed for now. The Smojo Academy is designed for basically like quite extensive logic and for data processing. So try your best. I mean, it's not necessary for you to go there. What we taught you actually is more than enough. Uh, Next questions,
But
right?
if
Oh
you
yeah.
if you do want to learn Smojo, we encourage you to do the first basic part on the online tutorial. That should be more than good enough. And we actually designed it for for high school students, so it shouldn't be too hard. All right.
Mm, yeah. Okay. Another question, another like question is that is it possible to create bot response based on time based on the time? Like for example, if the user didn't type anything for 5 minutes, the bot will actually like give response to the users. I think this is more like a push response, right?
Yeah. So we don't have push responses right now. We only have how do I say pull type responses, right? Where you can, but what you can do is when the user does respond, well, hang on. You can actually do it, but it's a bit tricky. The idea is that you can embed some JavaScript into your chatbot. Okay, so you can, I mean, theoretically, you can do it. Okay, but exactly what kind of response you want to put in is a different question. Okay, so you can have a little flag that says, you haven't answered it in 5 minutes, right? And then click to dismiss, right? And then dismiss. But that's just JavaScript. Remember, the chatbot interface itself is just a HTML interface, and you can actually put in any kind of JavaScript that you like onto it, right? So if you know JavaScript well, you can easily inject some JavaScript using the queue and the bracket queue anywhere in your scripts, and we can show you how to do that if you want to, right? It's not that hard. But as far as getting data from the server and maybe proactively shoving it response back into the server, the answer to that one is no. Okay.
Any other questions? Maybe like last two more questions.
Let me just elaborate a bit more on the last questions about time and so on. I think I can see a useful application. Let's say I'm asking a student a question, okay, and I'll say, is 1 + 1 equal to 2? And the student is pausing, and then he says, after 5 minutes, he says yes. Okay. Now then, what I can do is I can then actually make a response that is dependent on time. I can do that. And the way you do that is to actually, measure the elapsed time, because you can store the time in your mem. The word now will store the time, the current time. So you can check between in milliseconds. So you can check between the time it's stored, the time of the last interaction and the next interaction, and you can decide, if is there enough milliseconds that elapsed to make a change in your response. Okay, so it is possible to do that kind of thing, and that I think would be useful.
Actually, I like the idea, like especially let's say for teachers for education like purposes, right?
Yeah,
Let's say when you want to evaluate how good your students are, depending on like how long they are needed for to actually answer a certain question, right?
yeah,
Then you can actually like evaluate it and then put different kind of like scoring mark, scoring criteria based on the how fast they are to answer that question. So I think that
correct,
actually is a good feature. Yeah.
correct. So if to do something like that, what you have is a mem call, the question number, for example, right? And you can just update the question number in wherever rule that you're in when you ask the question. Okay. And when you update the question number, don't just update the question number. Also in your mem.m, the Smojo function will also update a mem which is on the time as well when the question was asked. Then when the answers is responded to, you know what question it was, and you also know when the person responded to it, right? How long it took. You can store that in a hash map or a tuple and so on. You can log that if you want to, right? There are many ways to actually get that information outside the chatbot. So you can actually do some analysis on it. Or you can even give the score to your student, says, oh, you took 10 minutes or 5 minutes, to actually run this test. Good luck. You made an improvement or something like that, right? Or you're within the top 10%. Okay, so there are many different ways you can do that. Okay, for those kind of more advanced usages, you do need to learn some Mojo, but not that much. I said most of that can be learned within a couple of hours.
Any other questions, guys? It's a delay of 10 seconds, so we just that's a limitation of using YouTube Live. Um, okay, I think that seems to be enough. So we are also like just nice, like just past 1 hour mark. I think maybe like what we can comment is that lots of you are actually building a very useful bots, and I think what is very heartening for us is that most of the bots that that our students or you guys develop are actually chat bots that serve some kind of social purposes. So we really like that, and but at the same time, like you have to be very mindful that in order to it's not just enough to build the bot that serve a purpose, but it's also more it's you have to make sure that the bot is actually useful or engaging for your users, because otherwise, right, you have a good intention but the intention is not delivering the outcome that you desire. So we really encourage you to get your bots right tried by as many friends or your families or as many people as possible that you trust, and ask their feedback, because that is actually a valuable lessons that that you need to learn, you need to acquire that to improve your bots. There's so many things that we can teach as an educator, right? But the best teacher, to be honest, is actually your users. So keep in mind, try small. Don't be afraid to, showcase your chatbot to person you trust. Get them honest feedback, and then improve your bot based on that. Any parting, perhaps like any parting comments, Arno?
Um, I think it's important to have fun at first, and I think make a bot that is meaningful to you, that you will probably use over or maintain or interested in maintaining over the next 3-4 months, right? That is really, as you grow, is where you actually learn. I would suggest that after this video, you actually get the recording, get the slides, and look at what I've said a little more closely and see where you can actually what is it called, implement those ideas. A lot of people make the mistake, or they hit a limit because they don't implement these ideas. Okay, like Chris says, that one problem is that too many IDKs. Why is that? Okay, and they say, oh, I can't do it. Or they might, for example, have a situation where they are constantly giving their users too many choices. That's also a bad thing as well. Oh, it's useless, right? So you need to, when you hit that kind of limit, it's more likely because the structure of the chatbot is not correct. The other structure, the other limit that you might hit is that the rules become too unwieldy. And that's really a function of how you structure your micro topics. So you really had to be careful about making it simple at first and then grow organically as you increase the complexity of a chatbot, right? So that's my parting advice. Okay, so don't give up. Pick a topic that you're interested in, because you might want to, in fact, don't be surprised that you would even redo the entire chatbot from scratch after the first time you've tried it, right? So if I have an application that I'm passionate about, then I might want to actually, once I do it the first pass, I want to redo it once or twice even, okay? Depending on my own experience with the chatbot, depending on my own growth as a chatbot creator as well, because you will grow and you will understand how things can be done better, right? So as Chris says, your users are a good teacher, but also experience is also a good teacher, and patience is also a good teacher. So you know, a lot of patience when it comes to chatbots, because it is not easy as it looks, right? It's easy to start, but not easy to do a good chatbot. Okay, I wish you all the best and good luck. And of course, you can communicate with us through the Telegram if you have any assistance or help. Thank you.
Okay. See you again, everyone. Any question, just post your questions on the Telegram group. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye, guys.